Hey friends, if Theology and Raw has blessed or challenged you in any significant way, would you consider supporting the show financially? You can do so through Patreon at patreon.com/theology in the raw. All the information is in the show notes. You can support the show for as little as $5 a month. And in doing so, you get access to all kinds of different premium content. And most of all, you just get access to the Theology in the Raw community. We have all kinds of awesome chats and messages back and forth. And it means the world to us that you support the show. As the show has grown, so have all the expenses and all the work that goes into pulling it off. So again, if you would like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/theology and raw. And I just want to thank the people that are already supporting the show. Thank you so much for keeping this show not only going, but also thriving. So patreon.com/theology and raw. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Theology in the Raw. My guest today is my good friend, the one and only Dr. Michael Bird. Mike Bird has been on the podcast too many times to mention. He's written too many books that you have time to read, including the most recent book that he co-wrote with N.T. Wright. I've got a copy here in my hand called Jesus and the Powers. Christian Political Witness in an Age of Totalitarian Terror and Dysfunctional Democracies. And this becomes the subject for our conversation. This is going to be a very interesting conversation because I also wrote a book on politics recently called Exiles. And I would say our books and our approach overlap a good deal. Mike Bird and I see eye to eye on a lot of things, including kind of how we view politics. But we might overlap about 80%, and there might be about 20% where we might come to different conclusions or have different approaches. And in this podcast conversation, we do try to tease out some of those differences. And Mike Bird is just a super wise and winsome dude, and so it's always fun to have a good, engaging dialogue with him. So please welcome back to the show for the umpteenth time, the one and only Dr. Michael Bird. Welcome to Theology and Raw, everybody. I'm here with my good friend Mike Bird, and we were having so much fun offline that y'all missed out on some fun back and forth that we were having. Mike, do you want to lead with that statement you just said? Because I was like, I was laughing so hard. I was like, I need to hit record and have you say that again. What's your perception of me and my sort of a political ecclesiology?
Well, having read your book Exiles and your book Fight about nonviolence and your general theological proclivities, I've always said it's a bit like John MacArthur and Stanley Hauerwas made a baby. A beautiful baby with great surfing technique, love for the church and people of all sexual expression, and is committed to the authority of Scripture and has a deep relationship with the church. But I would say that's where your theological paternity seems to come from, given what I know about you. And I've known you for a long time, Preston. I've known you for a long time.
Yeah. For those who don't know, me and Mike go so far back to, it was early on in my PhD studies at Aberdeen when you were teaching at Highland Theological College up in the Highlands of Scotland, in Inverness, right? North of Inverness.
Just in a little town of Dingwall, just north of Inverness.
Dingwall, that's right. Yeah. I was just there a couple of years ago. What a beautiful area. And I don't remember, where did we first, was it via email or did you come out to Aberdeen or somehow
it may have been a doctoral seminar at Aberdeen, or it may have been the British New Testament Society. I remember going for a jog with you and Todd Still, and it nearly killed me. I thought I was in pretty good shape. And then I went jogging with you two long-legged gazelles, and I think it nearly killed me. I mean, I thought I was in good shape because I did a lot of jogging, but I remember going, I'll go with these two American lads, and it was like trying to keep up with it was like a wombat trying to keep up with a gazelle.
Wombat. I thought you were saying kangaroo. I don't even remember. I think it was the British New Testament Conference. I think that was the first time we connected and we kept in touch. And you and your family came out to Aberdeen once we had already established a relationship, hung out with us for a few days. Most people on this podcast do not know that one of the very first books that my name is on the cover of is a joint book you and I edited called The Faith of Jesus Christ, where we collected a bunch of really world-renowned scholars to discuss the debated Greek phrase pistus christu, which in its most literal sense can be translated faith of Christ or faith in Jesus Christ, depending on which verse we're talking about. And both you and I had an interest in that debated phrase. I don't even think it's in print anymore, is it? I mean, you got to be a really scholarly
it might
nerd
be. It
to
might still
buy
be
that book.
It might still be in print, but it's one of my most cited books, because anytime anyone mentions the pistus christu debate in like a Galatians commentary or a Romans commentary, they always say, "Oh yeah, go see the essays in Bird and Sprinkle." So we're still considered the definitive collection of essays. The irony is, even after reading all the great essays in that book, even after reading the world-class scholars talk about, is it faith in Christ or the faithfulness of Christ?
Yeah,
I was still just as confused when I came out of it. I thought this book would settle the issue in my own mind, but no, I was still confused at the end. It could go either way.
Is that, I forget where you landed on that. Are you objective,
I tend to
subjective,
lean
or are
more
you
towards the objective genitive. So I think it's usually faith in Christ, but I still think there is an essential ambiguity in the Greek that because in Greek it's literally the faith, the pistis, as it pertains to the realm of Christ. That's basically what the genitive works. Okay, the faith as it pertains to the realm of Christ, which I think in context means applying your faith in Christ or towards Christ. But it can also be a bit more than that. And I think in Philippians 3, that's probably the one place where I would say the subjective genitive with the faithfulness of Christ might actually be a better translation based on the context and wider theological themes of the letter.
Can you, for our audience that doesn't know Greek, knows nothing about what we're even talking about, can you give us a 30 to 60 second overview of this debate? Because it really is significant. It's a one Greek phrase, but it occurs in some theologically rich passages, and it does make a difference.
Well, let me put it that, in Romans 3:22, Paul talks about how the revelation of God's righteousness has been revealed, pistis Christu, through faith as it pertains to Christ. So is it revealed in our faith that we put in Christ? Does our faith reveal the righteousness of God? Or is the righteousness of God revealed in the faithfulness of Christ himself to his messianic vocation? I mean, you could have come up with good grammatical and theological reasons for going either way on that topic. So that's basically what it comes down to.
Yeah. It really is a matter of, is the emphasis on human agency, human faith in Jesus, or divine agency, the action and faithfulness of Christ? And there's been what, Mike? I mean, 3-4 dozen scholarly articles written on this. Whole books have been written on it.
I'd say it'd be up like in our hundreds, the number of articles written on this going all the way back to the 1960s. You had a big famous monograph by Richard Hayes, in the early 80s, and that kicked off a whole bunch of discussions. Tom Wright's very big on the subjective genitive, so is Doug Campbell. Whereas people like Jimmy Dunn and and Francis Watson were not terribly keen on that. They went for the traditional objective genitive, that's faith in Christ. So it's a place where you really get your Greek Bible nerd on. I mean, it is the UFC of Greek Bible language, exegesis, syntax, lexicography, and everything.
Yeah. Those are fun. I spent my entire, or most of my seminary time, my independent research on this topic. And that was my original proposal for my PhD. And they kind of said, I think there's, it's been exhausted, so I didn't pursue that. It was a few years of my life were dedicated to that question, man. And now I can't even recall, how do you, I did argue for some, my listeners might laugh because obviously I pursued another option, a third way to interpret it.
The tertium quid, the faith that is through from Acts 3:18, if I remember correctly. From the faith that is through him. Remember that little?
Well, Acts 13. It was really that in Galatians, gosh, again, I'm going back 15 years. I haven't thought about it since. So, but in Galatians, what is it? 3:23. Now that faith has come, this sort of like event, the faith event,
Yeah,
Christ's death,
pistus is an event, which is what you find in Galatians too. You know,
faith. Yeah, and so Galatians 3:22 is one of the pistus Christu phrases, and Galatians 3:23 says, "Now that faith has come," this kind of like cosmic eschatological event of faith, which transcends the kind of objective human faith in Jesus, subjective faithfulness to Christ. Is sort of the faith event. I'm not going to take a bullet for it. It was more exploratory. I did hear that there was a recent article by my friend Kevin Grasso, which I still haven't read, that I think sort of resurrects a kind of more third way view. But anyway, we didn't even plan on talking about pistus Christu. My word, I'm not prepared for this. What I am interested in is your recent book. I'm going to hold it up here for my YouTube audience here. Jesus and the Powers, Christian Political Witness in an Age of Totalitarian Terror and Dysfunctional Democracies, by the one and only N.T. Wright and Michael Bird. And I'm not gonna ask you to comment on this because I know you're probably not allowed to, but in reading lots of stuff by Tom Wright and lots of stuff by Michael Bird, I'm gonna say my guess, I have nothing to verify this, and Mike's probably gonna plead the fifth, as we say in America, but I think you contributed a lot to this.
Yeah, but it's definitely a joint.
As one who has co-authored a book myself, I know how it is.
Yeah, well, I can say in all honesty, it is definitely a joint effort. This was not me. This is not me ghostwriting. Tom did have a lot of. He wrote the largest chapter of the book. I reworked some of his material, and even the stuff that was just my own effort. Tom had a big hand in shaping that. But probably the last three chapters, I would say, are more, particularly the stuff that's like the history of political theology and the case for liberal democracy. That is definitely very much my own little hobby horse.
Do you know me and Tom were just on the Unbelievable podcast talking about the book, and he actually even said that. He said, "Yeah, the last few chapters were all Mike Bird." I mean, he said that's so he's very forthright about that. What led you to write this book? I'm sure there's a personal story, a sort of contemporary situation that motivated you to want to write this. And can you give us any backstory to how you and Tom Wright collaborated on it?
Yeah, it was a number of things. First of all, it was the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is the single biggest war that's come to Europe since the Second World War. That made us think, what is a Christian response to this crisis? And if you're a Christian in either Russia or in Ukraine, what would your response to be to that? How would you live under Russian occupation if you were a Ukrainian Baptist? And there are lots of Ukrainian Baptists. I also think about Christians in Taiwan who face a very real prospect of Chinese attack and Chinese invasion in the coming years. I was also thinking of Christians in Myanmar who live under a military dictatorship. And in Myanmar, Christian is the majority religion amongst the minority peoples, particularly among the Chin, the Karen, and others. And then you've got the rise of Christian nationalism, which is, obviously quite a big deal in the US in some contexts, but it's also a global phenomena as well. You find varieties of Christian nationalism in South America, even in Africa as well. And I'd also ask that you've got some, progressive authoritarianism in other parts of the world. Like in Australia, you had what's called the Australian Capital Territory government decided to seize control of a Catholic hospital because they would not perform abortions. Now, they said, it's all about the rationalization of healthcare provisions. But the reason why this government seized control of a Catholic hospital was purely punitive. It was to punish Catholics for their refusal to perform abortions. And, that's an affront to a liberal democracy. Liberal democracy only works if you don't take punitive actions against, religious groups because you don't like their religion. So, as we looked around the world, Ukraine, Taiwan, Myanmar, January 6, various other issues about religious freedom in all parts of the world. I spoke to Tom, and we really realized this is a concerning time to be living in. The world feels very combustible, like we're just waiting for an Archduke Ferdinand to be assassinated, and then it's going to be on for young and old. And we began thinking about, well, what would be a word of wisdom in this age? How do Christians think about the powers of this age? How do they think about government and the like? And what's the spiritual dimension going on? And that's largely what we wanted to do. How do Christians relate to the powers of their day in a way that is faithful and resourced in Scripture and the Christian tradition?
Do you and Tom Wright resonate on your political views pretty much? Did you ever find yourself at odds with some of the things you're wrestling with?
No, I think we're very similar. We haven't gone through like a policy sheet and say, come on, tell me, where do you stand on immigration? Where do you stand on, monetary policy? We haven't gone through that, but we have a basic agreement that we are neither Christian nationalists nor Anabaptists. So we don't think Christians should stay out of politics. But at the same time, we're definitely opposed to the idea that we've got to get our guy in charge no matter what. And I mean, we're also shaped by the Anglican tradition, which is certainly up for a positive relationship with state authorities, maybe in ways that might be a little bit allergic or concerning even to some of our Baptist friends. So, we think, you can have a positive relationship with the state, even as we are very aware of the dangers of that cooperation, collaboration, even chaplaincy can, end up making yourself simply the religious capital to a global empire. We're aware of the downside to close church and state cooperations. But I think we're on the same ballpark for the most part.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I really enjoyed the book. I mean, there was, for people that haven't read it yet, it's not a hard read. It's not a long read, and it does bounce back and forth, I would say, really well between like biblical studies, going deep into the scriptures. As if anybody knows anything about Mike Bird and Tom Wright, you're going to expect they're biblical scholars. You're going to expect them to go to the text. But I was probably most impressed with how well versed you were. And again, I think this is probably a bit more of, well, not Tom's well versed in it too. So it was impressive how well versed you were with the modern political discourse, globally speaking too. You didn't just talk about like your Australian context. Tom didn't just talk about his British context. You have a very good knowledge of just kind of global politics as a whole. Is this something I didn't know this about you? I just knew you as a biblical scholar, and then you got into theology. I'm like, oh, he can do theology too. And then with your latest book, I'm like, oh, he does like global politics too. Is this something that you've been interested in for your whole life, or is this more of a recent hobby horse?
Well, it is. You got to remember, my previous career was military intelligence. So, I was doing military intelligence during the early days of the global war on terror. So, particularly in the late 90s, leading up to 9/11, that's kind of when I was, doing that sort of a thing. And it was very eye-opening. And that's kind of where I got, shall we say, very geopolitically aware. And I always try to keep myself abreast of, world news. I don't just read stories about, Florida man killed by swan. I try to do a bunch of more global news feeds into what's going on, whether that's, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa. I just try to keep myself more informed, and also, try to listen to and meet Christians from different parts of the world too, and to, hear from them what they're thinking, what's the issue that they're being confronted by. Because one of the problems I find with a lot of American books on politics and theology, I find they're concerned with two things, which is Roe v. Wade and Trump. And that's pretty much what most American books on political theology are about. Now, I understand, because that's kind of like the dumpster fire in your front yard, and you've got to kind of deal with that. But I would say that the whole spate of issues you've got to deal with around the world as a Christian are far broader than just Roe v. Wade and, the Orange Jesus.
The orange cheese. Did you see has his new study Bible out? Or not study Bible? Sorry, is whatever it was. It's
yes. That was
some American
it's a
Bible thing
Bible
he was
translation
promoting.
that was
I forgot what it
authorized by the King of England. May I add? Very patriotic. Very patriotic.
I'm happy to go any direction you want to go in this conversation, Mike. If there's somewhere you want to go, you want to press into, I'm happy. My quick comment on Trump is obviously he's a dumpster fire, right? I mean, it's what I don't understand is the shock. Like when that came out, I kind of chuckled, says, well, obviously he's going to come out with his Bible. Yeah. It's when people are shocked about it. I'm like, what are you shocked at? Like he's been around for almost a decade now. Like, he's going to manipulate religion to serve his power. Yeah. Like what American leader at least doesn't do that on some level? Like it's just I kind of yawn, roll my eyes and say, this is just the way like the empire does politics. Like it's not shocking. It's horrific and it's scandalous and idolatrous, and anybody that actually buys into it needs to get their head checked. But like, it's not shocking. Like I didn't even tweet it. I was like, oh, that's not surprising,
And it's not innovative. There's been similar Bibles as well. Jerry Falwell had his own like Patriots Bible or something. Zondervan was going to publish one like that, but because of the outcry, they decided not to. So it's not even an original idea. There's been a lot of, culturally nominal American Patriots Bible is not a big innovation on the Bible market by any stretch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I have a question for you, like personally, as you pay attention to global politics, how do you determine which sources to trust? I think this is a massive part of the conversation around various opinions around politics as a whole, is which sources are you reading? And especially in the day and age with, post-internet, social media, all the independent, like no longer are there like 3 news sources that we're all paying attention to. Now, like I only watch like independent, nonpartisan sources. And when I peek into this, kind of right-wing sources, left-wing sources, I'm like, oh, are we even talking about the same events? Because I'm reading people that will describe the same thing in a completely different way. Yeah. And then you times that by 1,000, and it's like, we're all just reading different sources, and it's like we're just living in all these parallel universes. So how do you determine which sources to trust these days?
Yeah, I think it's good to have a wide diet, a varied diet of media outlets. If your only source for information is either Fox or MSNBC, I guarantee you are getting a very one-sided story on the news. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I don't think you should. There's a lot of news outlets I don't like, but I still read a bit of them anyway. Like like the Guardian is a very left-wing sort of British thing, very identitarian. Mm-hmm. I don't like a lot of it, but I read it because I want to get another perspective on the news, or even. I do read a little bit of Fox News, or we have a bit of Sky News in Australia, which is kind of similar. I do read that too. Every now and again, I think they do offer a good insight or a good critique of some particular perspective. But I think you've got to read widely, because if you just live inside the one media bubble, what you're getting is not news. You're getting tribal propaganda, and that can be left-wing or right-wing. Yeah. So I think the best antidote for that is a varied diet of news sources. But there's also a number of other things. Like there's a good thing I listen to, not listen to, but read, which is called ground.news, which gives you a lot of news, and it actually shows you the biases in the reporting on any given issue. So it can show you which news outlets are reporting on something and where they sit on a broad spectrum. So ground.news, I think, is a very good one, because that kind of gives you the it kind of tells you what the bias is of different media outlets on the topic. But for me, I'd consider myself a more of a kind of a Wall Street Journal type of a guy. That I find that places like that are the more sensible outlets to get my news. If you read like the New York Post, you're getting something very right wing. If you read the New York Times, you're getting something very left wing. You can always aim for something that seems a bit more centrist and a little bit more impartial, because that's what journalism should be: independent and impartial, facts-based, differentiating the facts from the editorial commentary. But yeah, it's something that's becoming harder in this day and age, because the more partisan and the more extreme you are, the more clicks, views, likes, and shares you get. So we have an economy of journalism that is really much premised on the idea of monetary nonsense for profit, and it's hard. It can make it hard to do good journalism in that context. So yeah, find some good journalistic, a variety of journalistic outlets, and take out a subscription.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah. Yeah, I typically try these days, I try to listen to more long form independent outlets that aren't kind of big corporate entities, and it kind of depends on the issue. Like I've got a series of journalists that I found to be responsible and thorough when it comes to like foreign policy. They're not going to parrot the talking points of the left or right. And every now and then I'll do a deep dive, kind of my own fact checking on stuff. And if a certain journalist, if most of the time when I do that, it kind of checks out, I'm like, yeah, I think they're actually being really honest here, then I tend to trust that person. There's other outlets, and when I do a deep dive, every now and then I'll kind of, okay, let me spend a few hours kind of looking into something. And it's like, yeah, it's clear, just propaganda. It's one side of it. January 6th is a tough one. It's like, you look at the footage, and like some footage, gosh, this is going to probably be more distracting than helpful, but it's like, some footage you have like people trying to take over the Capitol and all these people, rushing breaking windows and attacking the cops and everything. Then other footage is like cops peacefully walking these protesters through the Capitol building. It's like, these are almost like two different events. And I'm like, I don't even know. There's like 40,000 hours worth of footage that I would have to search through to like actually see for myself. Like, okay, what actually happened on that day and how am I to think through it? And obviously it's been so politicized. The left says, this is why Trump shouldn't be elected. If he gets elected, we're going to have January 6th every day all over again. And the right's saying the left is just using this as a propaganda piece. And,
well, the number of
it's so frustrating.
Tell you it was not a good day. What was it, like six? Was it 6 or so fatalities, police and protesters?
Was it 6? I thought it was like 2. Was it? You'd probably know more than I would, honestly. Yeah, I don't know. Then some of the people that got arrested or didn't get arrested, like one of the main instigators that we have footage of him telling people, tomorrow we need to go to the Capitol. Who's that guy? What's his name?
What, Shaman guy or no?
No, it's the guy who was like going out of his way to tell people, tomorrow we need to go inside the Capitol. And he's showing up at every hot point. And of all the people that got arrested, he never did. And he was like escorted out by like 6 or 10 people. Like he was escorted. It's like, who is that guy that was like one of the main instigators? And then like, I think he recently got arrested, but like he was like kind of wasn't even, anyway, dude, I don't even want to get into all that. It's just like, every time I look into stuff like that, it's like, it's so politicized. And then I don't even know who to trust to tell me what actually happened. And I don't know, man. It's just, it's a good example of like, if you really want to know a thorough, honest opinion on a politicized event, you just have to do a lot of your own kind of independent research. Until you do, you just can't trust the headlines by politicized media. And that makes it frustrating, because it's like, if this is your full-time job, then what are you going to do? Either you just have to pick a side and just say, all right, I'm all in on this side, or you just kind of shrug your shoulders and say, I'm not ever actually...
That's what a lot of people do, sadly. They just pick a side and go all in. And then they become a distributor of that sort of perspective. And that's the sad thing. And, the journalists need to be loyal to the truth and they need to be loyal to the truth and faithful and responsible to their readers. But sadly, a lot of media consumers are now loyal to a particular outlet because of its tribal brand, and I think that's a very dangerous thing in our information age. And good grief, imagine what AI is going to do. It. You can now pretty much fabricate any event. You can fabricate images, voices, you name it. You can fake it now. I mean, it's just going to get even worse.
Man, we're getting off the rails here. Let's get into your book. I took a lot of notes in your book, and like you, I read a lot of books, and I'm kind of thinking like, what did I remember most of the time I was amening it. Sometimes I was like, is this true? And other times I was like, I'm not sure I agree with this. So, here's one statement. This comes on page 28. You said, and I don't know if this is so crucial to your argument that it's worth even highlighting, but it's just kind of the first time I was like, is this actually true? You say most people in today's world recognize as noble the idea is that we should love our enemies, that the strong should protect the weak, that it is better to suffer evil than to do evil. People in the West treat such things as self-evident moral facts. And I just have I wrote next to, I'm like, really? Question mark. Like, is it, do most people in the West think it's a moral good that we should love our enemies? Because as I look around, I see a whole lot of hate towards enemy, whether it's rhetoric on social media or what's going on in Israel, Palestine, or Russia, Ukraine, or people that even disagree on what's going on there. I mean, it's I don't know if it's self-evident that loving your enemies is kind of a moral good. Mike, do you want to defend that statement?
Well, I think if you sat down with someone and said, if you've got a work colleague or an uncle or a next door neighbor who you disagree with vigorously on, say, politics, would you rather convert them or kill them? I think most people would say they'd rather convert them to their own political cause. There's always been argy-bargy in politics, even in the first parliaments in Britain, or if you look at the founding fathers, they were talking some serious smack about one another. But they were all formed by the Christian tradition that we're meant to sort our differences out politically rather than at the point of a gun or at the edge of a sword. So that's what I would take that to mean. Yeah, politics is volatile, dirty, a bit rancorous, and highly polemical. But politics is where we solve our differences, not on the dueling ground.
I mean, I guess between those options, do we solve our differences or kill each other? Surely people wouldn't say necessarily kill each other, but I don't know. It doesn't seem in my anecdotal experience that people would be naturally prone to love their enemies.
Well, it is becoming more foreign. It is becoming a more foreign idea, but but the idea of love of enemy, was one of the things that has influenced things like the way we treat our prisoners of war. We don't, when we, if it's America, Australia, or wherever, the way we treat prisoners of war is according to the laws of armed conflict, which is, Geneva Conventions, very specific guidelines, what you can and can't do to prisoners of war. Now, if you go to, say, the Mongols or the Arab conquests, there is nothing. Once you've won, you get to do whatever the heck you want to the losers. But that's in the West. That's not been our ideology because I think we've been shaped by the Christian tradition with its focus on love of enemies.
Yeah, I don't know if Guantanamo Bay.
Well, no, it is. It's the proof because of the moral outrage about it. The moral outrage about Guantanamo Bay proves my point. We should be better than this. We should not be treating our adversaries in this way.
So you have a tension between kind of the moral outrage versus kind of what is actually happening in practice. So you're kind of tapping into when the authorities do something that is not loving your enemy, it's torturing your enemies. The fact that there is moral outrage kind of justifies your point. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Yeah, you will get some hotheads or some people who say, no, I do want some revenge on my enemies. I do want to be punitive. I do want to forget the Let's throw out the rules about torture and let's just get medieval on these guys. But that's where you need either you're in a military setting, you have a legal officer, or you have a or someone who's the voice of conscience and reason, who says, no, that's not how we would do it. Or as we would say in the Commonwealth countries, we kill the king's enemies in a legal and proper fashion. Because you can be charged with in the Australian military with illegally killing the king's enemies. There are ways that we conduct warfare and ways that we don't.
Yeah, I could see that. I maybe I would put a little more emphasis on the actual practice of what's going on, not the moral outrage. But yeah, that's I guess it's an interesting tension. All right, we'll set that one aside, because again, that wasn't like a main point you were making, so I don't want to make too much out of it. Me personally, I found myself in 70-80% loving your book, and I think you would say the same thing about my book. For my audience, Michael Bird endorsed my book Exiles, and then sent me a 2-page critique of it attached to your endorsement, which it's typical of academics. Like, we could say, this is a good book, it needs to be out there, here's all the reasons why I think it's, where I disagree with it. Which you gave me a reading list, and I went and read at least half of the stuff you told me to read. I read Jamie Smith. I'm slugging my way through O'Donovan, which I've dabbled in before, and other people who have been more critical of a more Anabaptist view. And I learned a lot from Jamie Smith. His Awaiting the King was really good, and he helped interpret Oliver O'Donovan to me. I guess I have several things where I'm still not quite convinced of his argument for, say, more government involvement. And to be clear, I never said Christians categorically shouldn't be involved in the government. I probably left the scent of suspicion, the scent of caution towards that, but I didn't count it. That wasn't any main argument of mine. So I'm still not sure exactly where I would land on that. My one critique of Jamie Smith and maybe some things in your book is I do wonder if it's taking seriously a robust theology of empire. Which I think there is. I think the Bible speaks a lot on empire, and I guess between the 4 or so empires that the Bible addresses fairly significantly, but even just the empire as a concept, not a specific empire, Persia, Babylon, Rome, but just the way the book of Revelation treats the Roman Empire as Babylon, and Babylon as this sort of transcendent concept that Christians should be extremely nervous about. Whenever I hear Christian political theologians talk more positively about the government or Christian involvement, all of a sudden the quotations from the book of Revelation seem to disappear. And I would just love to see them put their political viewpoint that has a very positive view of the government, or at least a more neutral view, in conversation with the book of Revelation. So I'm kind of, it's a long question. Do you want to?
Well, Preston, let me affirm the point. The dissonance you're feeling, I think, is completely justified. What I find, when people's preferred party is in power, they love Romans 13. So when my guy's in power, I'm all about Romans 13, submit to governing authorities. But when the other guy is in power, I'm all about Revelation 13. That's an evil beast, burn it to the ground. So when my guy's in power, it's Romans 13. When it's the other guy's in power, it's Revelation 13. Okay. So I think you're right. The New Testament assumes a context where there is a malicious predatory power, and I think Paul is often telling people to keep their head below the radar. Just focus on your local congregation. You're not there to convert the world in one sense, or even speaking truth to power is something that only happens spasmodically. You could say that, but there is a problem which the New Testament did not envisage. What do you do when the beast gets converted? And when the emperor wants to lay its kingdom at the foot of the cross, what do you do next? Do you can you simply dismantle the whole apparatus of empire? Now, whether we're talking about the Roman Empire, the British Empire, American global influence today, and can I say as well that the Bible's view of empire totally is not completely negative. While the Roman Empire, I think, is treated generally negatively, and so is Assyria and Babylon. But here's the thing, Preston, in the Old Testament, the Persian Empire always seems to be treated very positively. Going back to Cyrus, or if you look a lot of the prophetic literature written during the Persian period, like Ezra and Nehemiah, it tends to have a positive view of the Persian Empire as a view of divine providence. Now, maybe Persia's the exception that proves the rule, where empire is normally bad. But even if you look at the old Israelite kingdom, where you've got this sort of nation that's been put together and largely been created out of both exodus and conquest, you have, I think, a more morally opaque and morally complex picture of empire rather than just Jesus good and empire bad. I think there's just far more levels of complexity going on there. But the Bible aside, what do we do with the situation today when we have our own empires, be they the post-British Empire or the Pax Americana that we seem to live under? And I think Christians have historically been both the sponsors of empire, provided religious capital to it in bad ways, but Christians have also, I think, always been aware of the potential dangers of empire. And I think Christians have always been morally ambivalent about their own empires. And I think you see that very particularly in the British tradition. So let me give you an example. Let me give you an example how I think the British Empire was different to the other empires of the world. Now, as you know, the British invaded, or so I should say, took over India. Okay, they took the East India Company, which is kind of like the equivalent of Google taking over New Zealand. Okay, it's something along those lines, and doing all sorts of nasty things. Now, the reason the English could do this is because they were given the opportunity by elites within Indian society. They were financed in their work by Indian bankers, and they did it mostly using Indian troops. Okay, but however it is, they came to power. They came to power because there was a vacuum. The Mughal dynasty had crumbled, and as a result, the Persians came in and they looted, murdered, raped, pillaged, took everything out of Delhi, out of all the wealth of India, took it back to Persia. Then the Afghan warlords from the north, they came down to Delhi. They did the same thing, looted, pillaged. Marathas came down from the south. They kind of did the same thing. So the Mughal empire had crumbled, and the British went in and they created something else. And what they created was also based on corruption, exploitation. They did nothing to stop a massive famine. The British did evil and terrible things in India, just like the Persians, the Afghan, the Marathas. But here's the key difference. Here's the key difference. Back in the United Kingdom, when the reports came in of what the East India Company was doing in India, the East India Company was put on trial in the House of Lords. And you had people like Edmund Burke prosecuting the case against the East India Company for the crimes against the people, the various, human rights abuses, how they enriched themselves by pauperizing the population. So here's the difference. When the Persians, came back from India with all the loot and slaves they took, there was no Edmund Burke there who said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe what the Shah has done. This is terrible stuff." Same for the Afghan warlords. There was no one back in Kabul saying, "Oh my good grief, what have you people been doing in India? All of this violence and terrible thing, all the Marathas." The British were the only ones who literally put themselves on trial because of the crimes of their empire. And that, I think, is the big difference between a Christianized empire and the other empires of the world. And we could give this the technical name oikophobia. We're capable of critiquing the abuses of our own house because we've been shaped by the Christian tradition.
Man, dude, I mean, that's a lot. And I know almost nothing about the British Empire and its takeover of India. What would be, so your main, to just understand your main point is that it was the Christian influence in the British Empire that caused that added a sort of moral compass to the British Empire and caused it to address its own abuses of its
exactly. That's precisely what I'm saying. I should point out, I'm kind of riffing off a bit of Tom Holland here because that's his same point.
Mm-hmm.
He's always pointed out the British were always morally ambivalent about their own empire. And that ambivalence was all the way through. So you can get horrible massacres in places like Kenya as well, like in the 1950s. Horrible massacres by British forces there. But then you get the clergy in Kenya writing back to India, or missionaries, writing back to Britain, to England, saying, do you have any idea what our Her Majesty's forces are doing out here? It's terrible. And that leads to, investigations and things. That often takes time. But there was a sense in which the clergy in South Africa, or even in Australia, in New Zealand, were often the conscience, the spies, the people who would report back to the authorities, to the media back home, what was happening out in all these various colonies, and it did create a sense of moral outrage. Now, again, that does not excuse the abuses of empire, saying, oh, don't worry, we've got the morality police with us. But it goes to show, even in the conduct of empire, there was a moral texture of it that you do not find in other empires of the world, because they were not shaped by the Christian tradition. So the Shah of Persia couldn't care less about what people thought of his escapades in Delhi and the like. Or, or the Mongols and their conquests, or the Arabs, or the Aztecs or the Incas. They had no moral ambivalence about their own imperial violence. That moral ambivalence is because we've been shaped by the Christian tradition.
Okay, so that's helpful, Mike, and I'm a big fan of understanding before trying to refute. So I might spend most of this podcast just trying to understand what you're saying and think through it more without trying to like push back out of my ignorance. So you would say, I guess my question, and this is a genuine question, not a pushback question necessarily. Does the church, that Christian moral compass need to be part of the empire to speak truth to power in such a way that it could pull back the tide on the evils of the empire? I'm thinking of, yeah. I mean, one just an example, more in my context, is Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day is a Christian anarchist who didn't vote, wasn't involved in the government, and did, I mean, loads of stuff against injustices in the American culture from the perspective of this really radical separation from the state. I would say, I mean, we could talk about MLK. Again, these are examples that I'm not an expert. I know a little bit about these kind of incidences where, MLK, I feel like people would kind of like to hijack his story from different perspectives. Some say he spoke truth to power from a place of distance from the empire. Other people say no. He, like you even mentioned, he hung out with LBJ and he kind of got friendly. He kind of worked through the political system. I will say this though, when he started to speak out against Vietnam War, they killed him, and it's pretty sure that the CIA killed MLK. So it's like, the empire might listen when it's politically expedient, but don't push it too far, man, because we're not gonna bow the knee to you. So I don't know, man. I again, trying to understand you. So you would say it's there's enough historical examples of the church being somewhat, let's say, involved in the empire in order to pull back the tide on evil that the empire would naturally do without the Christian witness. Would that be a good summary?
And even to raise the question, should we even have an empire? Certainly after the Second World War, that was very much, I think, the thinking in the United Kingdom, and partly because it was just too expensive to run one. Running the empire was expensive, so let's set all these colonies in Africa and Asia free. That was one part of it. But I think there was a moral revolution saying, why are we even in the business of empire in the first place? So I do think that comes up. Now, you can certainly make those critiques in a church, in a faith community that is outside the state or not in a preferential arrangement with the state. So in the United Kingdom, the Church of England is an established church. I wouldn't call it a state church in the sense that it's a department of the state, but it is an established church and does have a historical and amicable relationship with the state generally. And you can offer those critiques from a whole bunch of different vantage points. But it also means Christians from different vantage points, whether you're Anglican, Methodist, Pentecostal, Presbyterian, whatever, they can also participate in political discourse. They can, write an editorial in the Times or in the Guardian. They can, run for public office. They can be appointed to the House of Lords. They can participate in the system, whether they're in a established church or a non-established church. That they can all influence the game and be the voice of conscience. And they largely work with their moral and spiritual authority, not based on the authority of money or power or anything like that.
What about, can a Christian, again, genuine question, good faith question, can a Christian or / the church be involved in the empire without the power of the empire co-opting the Christian witness? I'm trying to think of the best, most concise way to say it, but I think does that make sense? Like, I, and this might be more my cynicism. I don't know if I could give loads of evidence to justify this. It's more my sort of anecdotal strong hunch that the empire will listen to the Christian voice in as much as it's expedient for the empire to maintain power. Right now, in America, this is going to make some people mad, but it's Theologian Raw, so I can't go through an episode without making some people mad. Like the international courts have determined in a 15-2 vote that what's going on in Gaza is a plausible genocide. That's just the legal language that's being used. I've read through the entire 84-page report by South Africa, and I would agree, based on my very limited knowledge, that it is plausible. I'm not saying definitive, but plausible. Like there's 15 pages of genocidal rhetoric from all the top leaders of Israel and the evidence, the aftermath, all and Biden keeps sending billions of dollars, just sent over 1,800 2,000-pound bombs, which is designed not to target individuals, or just getting Hamas, sometimes, it's designed to level whole buildings and neighborhoods. And, so the United States government is one of the main funders of this, again, the legal terminology, plausible genocide. And there's a whole Israel lobby. There's loads of money and power. There's so much at the top wrapped up into why this is happening. My hunch is the only reason that the Biden administration will reverse its funding of a plausible genocide is if it will keep him in power. Right now, there is the tides have turned. So more than 50% of the population, and I think I want to say, don't quote me on this, but it's maybe 75% of Democrats are against Israel's response. It could cost him the election. I think when he and his administration realizes, like, this is going to cost us election, we need to pull back on this whole plausible genocide thing. I think then they might. But I'm like, but yeah, your sort of moral compass is really when it's politically expedient for you. I mean, we can get into Russia, Ukraine. That's a whole different situation. Maybe we shouldn't even get into that. But so in as much as the church can have an influence in the moral direction of the empire, I am suspicious about the lasting effects of that. And I'm nervous about how the church can be kind of caught up in the power mongering, power pursuit of the empire itself. Is that making sense, Mike? And again, I'm trying to.
Okay. Well, let me give you two examples. Imagine you have been appointed as the Israeli ambassador to Israel. Okay. And, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says, okay, Preston, here's what I want you to do. I want you to do a press conference, and I want you to tell people that there's no genocide going on. The Israelis just a little bit, missing a few targets, but I want you to go on and say there's nothing, because, if they find out about it back home, it's going to be bad for us. Now, if you're a good, being the good Christian man you are, you could say, look, I'm normally, I want good positive relationships with Israel and all that sort of thing. But you may say this is crossing a moral line, and you would be within your right to resign and then to write an op-ed in the New York Times saying why you resigned as the American ambassador to Israel because we are sanctioning. So I think you can serve faithfully in the government. You can even wrestle with, shall we say, levels of moral ambiguity, because sometimes it's not always crystal clear. But you could come to a point of clarity and say, I refuse to be part of this machine. I'm all for good relations between, America and Israel, but I think we're now on the team. And a number of diplomats have actually done that. A number of people in the State Department, I believe, have resigned. I don't know whether they're Christian or not, but on principles. So, even if you work in government, whether it's as a diplomat, a military chaplain, or in any role, there can come a point where you say, no, on this issue, I will not. Here's my phone number. Give me a call when we're no longer supporting genocide in Gaza, or we're no longer, selling arms in Nicaragua, or whatever the cause du jour happens to be. It's not like once in, all in, forever. You are capable of making protests within, and precisely because you are in, and because you have a history of working hard to do good, what is right, working for good government. When you do leave, and when you do leave on the basis of conscience, it becomes all the more powerful, because you're showing that you're not a political tribal shill. You are generally one who can sit above the table of political partisan activities.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, that's good.
Actually, Christian, can I ask you a question? I want to ask you a question. This is, we can maybe put on your Exiles book. And maybe this question will help you understand where I'm coming from. Now, I understand you want to be the prophet speaking truth to power. But here's my two questions for you. What do you do if the power does not listen? And even worse, what do you do when the power does listen to the prophet? What do you do then? So if you want to speak truth to power, if the power doesn't listen, what do you do next? Do you engage in civil disobedience, uncivil disobedience? And if the power then listens and says, you know what, Preston, you are absolutely right. What's going on is Gaza is terrible. We want you to head a delegation to talk to various agencies and find out what's really happening and make a recommendation about what we should do. So what do you do if the power doesn't listen, and what do you do when they do listen? And this I think is the weakness of the Anabaptist view. So you tell me, Preston, how would you respond to that?
I would be profoundly cynical whether that second option would ever be a reality. I think I'd be shot or thrown in prison with Julian Assange when he starts exposing the war crimes that the military industrial complex has done. Or maybe I'd be thrown in prison with, Bill Clinton's good friend, Jeffrey Epstein, and so many other elites at the top. Yeah, if I say, hey, I think we should love our enemies, forgive those who have wronged us. I think we should care for the poor, and I think we should give the middle finger to anybody with power and money that wants to influence political decisions. Like if I actually embodied a Christian value system in my speech and my being, I don't think Babylon's actually going to listen to me. But you're going to say, okay, yeah. But what if they do? Okay, then great. Yeah. I'm not, I think one of the mistakes, and I don't claim to be Anabaptist. I've made a lot of Anabaptist friends. I've never even been to an Anabaptist church. Wasn't raised Anabaptist. Like I don't have, it's really my exegesis that has got me to a place that seems to make a lot of Anabaptists happy. So I don't have like a ecclesiological kind of commitment to that position. I guess I think the church, if the church embodies the political ethic in economics, in health, in immigration, in enemy love, in nonviolence, and all these things, that it has the ability and power to influence society without necessarily, I'm going to leave that door open, not necessarily getting involved in sort of the political system. Again, I've never said I'm 100% against all Christians always, never being involved. I'm just, I think that we can accomplish good in society by being the church if we actually are being the church. So what happens if Babylon says, okay, we're actually going to listen to you? Sure, yeah. Then stop sending money to Israel. Stop.
Yeah.
Just let's take our $1 trillion military budget and you'll like this, Mike, and let's throw that into healthcare. I don't know, like let's a bunch of people are hopping the border, and coming into America. I'm like, okay, great. So we can save money on mission trips, and instead of going and spending money on airfare to go witness to people overseas, they're coming over here. So let's embody the kingdom of God to them. Like I think my if I take a robust kingdom ethic on all these political issues, I'm suspicious about whether the powers to be will genuinely listen to me. What was the first side of your question, though? It's when you speak.
The first part is, what do you do if the powers don't listen? Would you be prepared to run for office? Okay, would you want to be like the William Wilberforce and say, I'm going to get elected to Parliament and I'm going to bring universal health care to America, or something like that. Yeah. Or I'm going to stop us in doing these silly wars in all these different parts of the world that have nothing more than a mass expenditure and loss of steel and loss of blood and everything. So, I mean, do you get the point? Like, they won't listen, so I'm going to run for Congress, for the Senate, for president, for governor, or something like that, or for your local council. That's one thing. Do you get the point where someone needs to run to be an alternative to the bi-party, to the two-party system?
How is that different than Christian nationalism? Because that's exactly what all our Christian nationalist friends would say, right?
Christians running for people into Christian nationalism.
I mean, that's their whole project. Isn't that their whole project? If they want to get Christians in positions of political power so that we can make this place more Christian-like?
At one level, it is. They want to get Christians elected to power, but they then want to do two things. They want to impose a particular version of Christianity. I'm not talking C.S. Lewis mere Christianity, but they want to impose a particular version and vision of Christianity, one that is often welded to militarism, empire, expansion, and is also American-centric as well. So it's also combined not just with a sort of, a Christian aspect, but it's also very much America first. America is the chosen nation. So there's a kind of American mythology that's in there as well. And I would also add the other big difference is they also want to make sure that no one else can get into government ever again besides them. So, let's get into power and let's be Christian, but our type of Christian, let's make it American-centric because America is the new Israel, and let's make sure we never, ever lose another election.
Okay, so I can say, okay, so there's some differences there. Yeah, because you have a quote here, actually, you might have answered my question. This is on page 77, where my comment is, how is this not Christian nationalism? Where you say, the redeeming of human institutions such as government, the curation of creation, making them good, making them fit for their divinely called purposes. This prepares for the kingdom ahead of the ultimate unveiling of God the Father's rule in Jesus with his church, when everything is put under Jesus, and we, the church, shall reign with him over a healed and holy world. To me, yeah, in passing, when I read that, I was like, that sounds similar to what I hear Christian nationalists say, but I think your distinction of, and I get Christian nationalism can be defined very differently. I listened to your debate with Stephen Wolfe, by the way. It was really interesting. Has this sort of mythology of America as a Christian nation, the new Israel, has a deeper rooted mythology that's kind of driving the whole project. Is that would you say that is the biggest difference between that and what you're suggesting, that it is, it can be a good for Christians to be in places of political power, to reform?
Yeah, I mean, if a Christian just wants to make government to operate good the way it was intended, I believe that is a redemptive thing. So, good government that operates in a good way, I think, is doing a Christian vocation in the political realm. So I would say that's fine. That doesn't have to be part of a nationalistic project or a certain mythology. Christians are called to see government operating the way God intended for a common good, and even, I would say, including with the consensus of the people.
I think a fundamental underlying theological commitment on your part is that government is a sort of post-lapsarian, post-fall creation by God that's designed for good, that because of the fall can fall into evil, but as an institution, it is a good of creation. Whereas I'm not, honestly, I'm still thinking through that, Mike. I'm not quite convinced of that position, but I think that would that be an accurate description of your assumption about government? I think you said that in the book.
Yeah, I think you could say government is part of the fall. Or it's either both an expression of the fall, the way it's sometimes run, but also it's there to stop human wickedness, corruption, and injustice. I mean, that's one of the, read Romans 13. That's one of the primary functions of government, is to administer justice, and that should be, modeled on, based on God's concern for justice across the whole earth. So I think government is fundamentally necessary to restrain human evil. If you don't believe me, just look at Haiti right now, where there is no functioning government in Haiti. It's really just being ruled by gangs. So, as bad as bureaucracy is, the anarchy of lawlessness and gangland violence, I think, DMV starts to look pretty darn good after a while.
Yeah. I guess I would say I think our White House has enough gangsters in it that it doesn't look like Haiti. It's a different form of gangsterism, but yeah, no, I see that, man. I guess I don't have enough. Yeah, it's something I need to keep thinking through. Yeah, and again, I don't have a firm position on. Is there? I mean, Wilberforce is a classic example. I know you keep bringing him up, and there's other examples of where we can look back and say, because a Christian was involved in the government, there was good that was accomplished that might not have otherwise been accomplished had this Christian not been in that position of political power. Is that be a good summary of what you're saying?
I think that's a good summary, and there are lots of examples of Christians being a positive influence on government for the better, and you can find that in all different parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think the church could have, in Britain? I know nothing about British history. Do you think the Christian church could have accomplished what Wilberforce accomplished without, say, Wilberforce never existed? there was no Christians in political power. If the church was actually being the church, could it have accomplished what Wilberforce helped accomplish, do you think? Like, it's kind of a theoretical question.
I think there would have been another Wilberforce. I think there would have been someone else, I think, would have stood up, because in British society, there was a very big abolitionist movement. So I think if it was not going to be Wilberforce, someone else would have stepped up. And remember, Wilberforce did have parliamentary supporters. He had a support base inside politics and outside of politics. So I think it was going to happen. But you've got to appreciate how radical this really was, because when the British said to the Kingdom of Morocco, guess what, guys? You people are going to stop doing slavery now, or we're going to blockade your ports in North Africa. The King of Morocco thought they were insane. He thought, but everyone has slavery, like the Arabs, the Ottomans, the Byzantines, the Romans, the Greeks, the whole Mediterranean world had slavery. And the Brits come along with their imperial power and say, we're shutting that down, boys. And they thought it was insane. But once their ports got blockaded, then the King of Morocco said, you know what? I guess we're quitting slavery. And then they begin to reinterpret Islamic tradition to justify the end of slavery. And the Brits acted, you have to admit, and this is what historians know, they acted fairly unilaterally on this crazy idea of shutting down the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, it wasn't a fan of the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Spanish. They were not on board with the British initially. The British really did go this alone in the 18th century when they shut down the transatlantic slave trade.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, your knowledge of all these different issues, man. I don't know when you sleep. You don't really sleep, do you? You sleep about 4 hours a day and spend the rest of your time reading books on every single topic that's out there, which is why I appreciate everything you write, man. It's always so thoroughly researched and thought provoking. Yeah, I guess you raise good points, and again, I don't have a strong pushback necessarily. I guess I just do want to raise the question: can the church accomplish good in society without being entangled with the governing authorities? And I think you would say it's probably a both. Like, yeah, do all that, be the church,
yeah,
and also it wouldn't hurt to have people involved in the governing authorities. How do you think the author of the Book of Revelation would have been on board with your view, or how do you square it with? And I don't know if I agree with you on the whole Persian Empire thing. I mean, Daniel and Revelation both call it a beast, and the kingdom of God in Daniel 2 will come in and crush these empires. Like it was a benevolent dictator, and it funded the temple and stuff, but it was still a beast. I think at the end of the day, like I don't know if I would say the Bible speaks positively about the Persian Empire, less negatively maybe than Babylon, Assyria, and Rome. But I don't. We don't need to. Maybe that's for another conversation. But yeah, I don't know. Like, does the author of the Revelation, is it simply because the church didn't have the ability to kind of be involved in the empire? Like there was such a minority persecuted group, or yeah, how do you square your view with Revelation?
Well, I would say Revelation, you've got an intense period of persecution, very much at the epicenter of the church's failure to participate in the imperial cults of Asia Minor. So you're going to get a very obvious pessimistic view of idolatry when it's forged together with imperial power and violence, and they're opposed to the people of the Messiah. But again, in our biblical theology, that's not the only picture we get, okay? So, when Paul and Barnabas are on Cyprus and the proconsul Sergius Paulus seems to come to faith, what do you do then? Does he resign from his post and join the believers in Cyprus, or does he go back to Rome and join the church there? What do you do with a Sergius Paulus when he comes to faith? Or do you remember when Paul is on trial before Agrippa II? And Agrippa says, "Look, dude, you are out of your mind. Are you trying to make me a Christian?" And what if Paul succeeded? What if Agrippa II did become a Christian? What would that mean for his kingdom? What would that mean for the subjects? These are the questions. Now, those are not on the lips or on the mind or the text of the book of Revelation, because it's dealing with the monster that's chasing the people. Okay. But there are a wider array of issues in the New Testament that I think we've got to look at, not as a correction to what's in Revelation, but another part of the story of the complexity of church-state relationships.
Yeah, that's good. Do you think? I mean, I'm going to let you go in a second, man. I promise. Yeah, but we really don't hear about the post-conversion life of the centurion and Matthew 8, Sergius Paulus, and what is it? Acts 13 or 16, 15, 14, actually Acts 14. And other people who are part of the empire who get saved. We just don't hear about the post. What we know about what it entailed to be part of the political entity of the Roman Empire, I just don't think they could have maintained their. I mean, once they start giving their allegiance to Jesus and renouncing their allegiance to Caesar and stop participating in pagan practice, I just don't think they would be able to be a legitimate Christian and maintain their political position in the first century. Now, granted, though, those are like, even if you agree with that on a historical level, we can't map that on every modern day situation. So I don't even know if that's, it's just it doesn't support either point. I think, the centurion was saved. So being a centurion is fine. It's like, well, no, he could being a centurion, you're basically a pagan priest, like, in all the pagan rituals you'd be involved in. Like, there's no way he could have been a genuine Jesus follower, maintained that kind of discipleship and kept his centurion position, renouncing his allegiance to Caesar. Like, that's,
Well,
it's kind of like you ask, like, yeah.
Well, I would say this, Julian the Apostate, after you get Constantine and you get Julian the Apostate, who tried to change the Roman Empire from Christian back to pagan. He had a lot of Christian officers and soldiers in his army who, for reasons I don't understand, went along with it. So even Julian the Apostate, who's trying to de-Christianize the empire, still had a lot of Christians involved at all levels, because by then the Christianization of the empire was in full swing, and so much so, I think Julian the Apostate would have been unable, I think, to reverse it. So it's kind of like the tsunami has come over the bank, and shooting arrows at it is not going to stop it. But he had a good crack, and maybe if he lived longer than he did, only ruled for 4 years, maybe he would have done more. But yeah, I mean, Christians under Julian the Apostate, I think, did live in an ambiguous space where they had an anti-Christian empire, an anti-Christian emperor, but they were themselves Christian. They were working in the administration. And I think it would have been similar in other periods. There was always going to be something you had to negotiate in the Roman Empire. Let me give you one example. In Rome in the 2nd century, there was a particular pope, I can't remember his name, who had a problem. The problem is he had a large number of Christian women from the senatorial class. Now, they couldn't marry, there weren't enough men at Christian men at elite levels, and if they kind of marry down, they lose their elite status. So you had these Christian women who are from the senatorial class who can't marry other pagan men because they're pagans, but if they marry down, they lose their status. So how can they get married and keep the status? The Pope at the time in Rome gave them the option of marrying a Christian slave in a relationship that was recognized by the church, but not recognized by the state. That was one of the ways they negotiated. How do you find husbands for these, uptown elite Christian women? So that there was always this the strategy or this struggle of negotiating life in the Roman Empire if you belong to the upper echelons of society.
Wow. Man, that's good stuff. I'm going to let you go, man. thank you so much for this book. First of all, Jesus and the Powers by Michael Bird and N.T. Wright. Highly, highly, highly recommend reading this book. Again, it's, the scholarship and research is exquisite, but it's also extremely readable. I mean, you could read it in a few hours. Thank you so much for your contribution to this. Michael, I love you, man. I love it. I love you more when we see different sides of various issues. And that should be set in the context of the fact that I think we see eye to eye on so many things.
Indeed. Well, it's always good to be with you, Preston. My question is, Preston, have I now eclipsed Joey Dodson as the most number of time guest? Because I think me and Joey are in an epic battle to see who's been the guest on your show the most. So is it me or is it Joey?
He might have a couple episodes up on you. But you're definitely in the top tier. I don't know how many times you've been on, like 4 or 5 times or something. Joey might be in 6 or 7
something
times.
like that.
But yeah, it's close. Yeah. Shout out to Joey Dodson. I also want to shout out to my friend Jay Newman, who's going to be listening to this episode, and he's going to be ripping out his hair because he's going to disagree with probably a lot of stuff you say, and is going to scream at me for not pushing back harder. Not scream at me. Yeah. Mike, thanks so much for coming on Theology Raw, man. Really appreciate it. We'll have to have you back on next month or sometime soon.
Yeah. Preston, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and thanks to all your listeners for joining us.
This show is part of the Converge Podcast Network.